Yo, what's up, Plus Ultra fam? It's me, Plus Ultraman, and I'm happy to getting back to the story of baby Goku, or Kakarot in this timeline, being sent to the planet Namek. Now, as always, a quick recap. In our last installment, we saw the Saiyans gathered on an alien planet, where a shaky alliance was formed between them. The goal of this group? To take out Frieza. Paragus showed his true colors, and the Emperor of the Universe reared his head after Bardock's plan failed. We return to this timeline, now. The Saiyans were almost frozen as they saw the monstrous final form of Frieza, who was currently cackling and gloating at the situation. Frieza expresses how happy he had been with his decision to destroy their race when he could, and commends them for posing a pretty significant threat just now. He reveals that if not for his final form, he may have actually fallen to them. However, as entertaining as their little attempt at rebellion had been, he was a bit angry at himself for overestimating them so much. The strongest of these monkeys was barely above 1% of his power after all. Paragus smirks at this and punches Bardock away, as the two had been locked in combat for the last few seconds. He then began to call to Frieza, praising him as his lord and such. This got him cursed at by Bardock, who surged back at him with Nappa and Tora at his sides to take on the traitor, but they were all blown away by a swipe of energy from Frieza, who began to applaud Paragus for his loyalty. Frieza supposed it would be fun to keep another monkey as his pet, especially since he had lost a large number of his favorite underlings in the attack, and he would be needing new ones. Paragus, in proper brown-nosed fashion, happily agrees with this sentiment, and says that he and his son Broly would be happy to serve under Frieza once again, and were much stronger than even the Ginyu Force. Broly, who had been frozen by the orders of his father earlier, hearing him try to involve him in this cowardly betrayal, drew into an intense anger, and he actually reared on him for the first time, speeding towards him in a rage before noticing the silver object in Paragus' hand. By the time he was in striking distance, he ended up skidding along the ground as electricity began to surge through him at a dangerous rate, causing him to try and reach for the collar around his neck and pry it off. Vegeta currently found it hard to focus, but had recovered from the shock of the situation enough to know that their current position was very bad, with Paragus having turned on them, Frieza right there, poised to strike them down, or watch while Paragus tried to. He knew they had to act now. He roared out to Raditz, Tarbo, and Kakarot, who wanted to help Broly, but knew his power was needed to even stand a chance of rivaling this demon of an opponent they currently faced. The four Saiyan warriors fly straight towards Frieza, ready for combat, and the tyrant was all too happy to torture his former slaves one last time before completely wiping them out this time. Bardock, Nappa, and Tora easily plowed into Paragus, who was at a disadvantage in terms of power against Bardock, and with the help of Tora and Nappa there, he was in really big trouble. But he did have a trump card, and gripped the remote for Broly's collar very tightly, and soon the three Saiyans attacking him began to writhe on the floor in pain of the electricity going through their bodies, similar to Broly. Paragus began to gloat that his plan had worked, and called Bardock an idiot. If it were true that he had known Paragus was untrustworthy this entire time, yet didn't think to investigate what he had been doing when he was not training and away from the other Saiyans, he truly was a fool. All it took was pieces from the scouters that Bardock had broken when they arrived on the alien planet, and a few fragments of Broly's collar, and he had been able to recreate the effects of the original collar in a smaller and attachable form. He attached them to the others the last time they had sparred together, though unfortunately Vegeta and Kakarot did not train with them, and as such he was unable to attach one of the tasers to those two as well. As such, Tarbo and Raditz were also unable to continue the assault on Frieza due to the harsh electricity running through their bodies. So Vegeta and Kakarot were struggling just to stay alive against the monster Frieza, who laughed hysterically while toying with the two. But then, a voice that had so far gone unnoticed reappeared. Gine was here, and she was not happy. Being the type to not want to train, Paragus had never gotten a chance to bug her either, and she took full advantage of this by charging towards him. She tried to wrestle the controller away from him, roaring at him like a beast to little effect. She was still too weak to really inflict much damage on him, and as such, he was able to easily smack her away. She just so happened to land by the writhing form of Broly, someone she had come to see as a surrogate son, and someone who was in pain. Gine struggled to her feet and moved closer to him, and almost too quietly for Broly to hear, began to speak while growing louder.
I used to think your father was what a Saiyan man was, someone who viewed their children as little more than tools. But I've learned something. A real father sacrifices for and loves his children, and if your father won't do that for you, then we will!
She roared with a fierce motherly determination. Gine wrapped her hands around Broly's collar, taking the force of the shocks that had been enough to force even him into submission, and roared out with all her might before a loud snap was heard, and she dropped to the floor in a smoking heap. Broly stood to his full height soon after. The next thing he would have to do broke his heart, but this had all gone way too far. Paragus stood over Bardock, who was somehow beginning to fight through the pain of the electricity and standing slowly. Apparently, these devices were nowhere near as strong as Broly's. Paragus formed a ki blast in his hand and looked at the rebel with a cruel grin, telling him that this was as far as he would go with his foolish plan. Forever brave, Bardock showed no fear and looked on bravely, but that turned into shock as the arm of Broly came through his father's chest, and the monster of a Saiyan reached forward and crushed the remote and buried his hands, freeing his comrades. Broly roared out in pure anguish and rage as his eyes shined in a piercing yellow. He was just barely in control of himself, thanks to the meditation with Kakarot, and flew straight towards Frieza, who had stopped his beating on Kakarot and Vegeta just long enough to see the proceeding, before Broly barreled into him, his power 10 times what it had used to be, and growing more and more the more angry he got. The others recovered soon after, and Kakarot and Vegeta take the time to recover while watching Broly battle the tyrant by himself almost. Frieza was getting overwhelmed and slowly picking his power up more and more. Once they sensed him grow stronger than Broly again, they jumped back in and the three began to fight in perfect synchronicity. Raditz and Bardock moved to check on Gnat, who was barely breathing, while Nappa and Tor run into the fight with Frieza, hoping to help as much as they could. Raditz takes charge and orders his father to protect his mother as he followed them into battle. Bardock saw the battle and proudly guarded that his clan, his children, and his comrades were all fighting together. He then scooped up Gnat and took her far enough away to be out of immediate danger, and came back soon after to see Nappa fall to a death beam. The Saiyan brute was down but not out, and Bardock took his place, belting the space tar in the face right after him. Frieza was growing sick of this game, and at this point had pushed himself to 50% of his power, desperately wanting to go no further. But just then he noticed something. There was a light above him, and he looked up to see the Powerball had returned and been launched by Tarbo, who had finally recovered like the others. Frieza tried to fire a beam at him, but was stopped by the Saiyans as they all started to pile onto him as great apes and trying to rip him apart. He was going to be forced to go all out at this rate. Planet Vegeta began to shake with the force as Frieza powered up to his full power state, and soon the Saiyans couldn't keep him down anymore and were blown away from the force. Frieza growled and looked up to the energy orb and fired an I-beam at it, destroying it once again, and looking to its creator with extreme malicious intent. In the next instant, the young Prince Tarbo disappeared in an explosion right afterwards. At that moment, Bardock and Vegeta roared out in horror and rage and flew in to kill the murderer Frieza. Vegeta's power began to burst to a new height, and his body felt some surge of new power and rage as something began to change within him. He could feel this energy, but he just could not grasp it yet. Though Frieza was done playing and formed death saucers above his hands, throwing them at his enemies and trying to direct them to cut them all in half. The Saiyan rebels then began nimbly and desperately dodging the attacks, but two of them realized a sacrifice had to be made to make it out of this battle alive. Nappa and Tor, realizing they didn't have much more to offer in this fight, waited until the disc got close enough and then detonated themselves, destroying them and the disc as well. Bardock was further racked with grief, and if one paid close enough attention, they would feel a similar power coming from him that Vegeta was taking hold of solely. Before Bardock could really even focus on this power, he looked up to see something he'd hoped he'd never see again. The last thing he'd seen before Frieza sent him to hell the first time. A huge supernova had been formed above Frieza, and the Emperor began to hurl it down towards the group. Reacting on instinct, Bardock bravely charged forward and began to fight against it with a huge blast of his own. The seemingly unstoppable attack began to push him back as he fought against it alone, resigned to his fate again. But he was summoning all that he could and began to gain a faint glow around himself before hearing the voices of Raditz and Kakarot yelling out as they too mirrored their father's blast and fought with him. Vegeta roared and fired off a rage-filled Gallic cannon, though Broly showed them all up with a massive green anger-filled mouth blast. The attacks fused and battled against the supernova for supremacy, though Frieza's attack began to push back against the group, and they were not prepared when Frieza began to pour more and more of his energy into it, forcing it down on the Saiyans and their home world. Frieza then began to cackle and gloat at his victory over the race once more, but noticed the orb of energy stop its motion, and soon heard a chorus. Not again! We will not lose again! The attack was then hurled back at him as the forms of Kakarot and Vegeta began to shine with a bright golden glow, and their hair and eyes had transformed as well. Broly was right behind them with a harsh green aura flaming around him, yet his hair remained in his black raised state, as if he was on the edge of something similar. The group began to attack the Emperor again, as Bardock, having lost his grip on the similar energy, sat with Raditz and watched in surprise. No one had to actually speak it. Guru had always told Kakarot stories of the Super Saiyan, and he knew that this must have been that same power. Broly, Kakarot, and Vegeta fall back in the perfect synchronicity of fighting with each other. Frieza becomes easily overwhelmed by the three Saiyan prodigies, and soon found himself on his back, looking up as the three stand over him with ki blasts at the ready to end him. Frieza was completely outgunned, and he knew it. So, he knew it was time to play dirty. He quickly aims a death beam for Broly, with Kakarot and Vegeta being completely shocked. Kakarot dives in to push Broly out of the way, and has the beam go right through his heart. Vegeta yells out, "Damn it," and with everything he has, blasts the exhausted Frieza out of existence. Broly cradled Kakarot as his life began to fade from him, and he couldn't help but explode in rage right afterwards. Like Vegeta and Kakarot before him, he had finally achieved the Super Saiyan state, but something was wrong with it. He wasn't in control. and just began to attack everything. Vegeta, Bardock, and Raditz began trying to subdue him, realizing how dangerous he was in this state, but he was completely trouncing them, beating them down harshly. Finally, the rampage was stopped, as the call from Gine rang out, and soon she had the man in a hug, whispering to him that everything was going to be okay. Broly soon calmed down, and began to mourn the loss of his best friend, his surrogate mother. A few hours later, the remaining Saiyans surveyed the situation. Bardock and the others being extremely tired from the battle. They're soon contacted by Nail, who sadly informs them of the death of Guru, and is in turn told of the death of Kakarot. This further saddens Nail, and he tells Bardock of the new creator of the Dragon Balls. Mori was able to try and make new modifications to the Dragon Balls with Kakarot in mind. It was now possible to revive multiple people at once with one wish, but this would really drain Porunga by a huge amount. So whenever this were to be employed, Porunga would only be able to complete 2 wishes at most. Bardock thanks Nail for the info, and brings up this fact to the rest of the Saiyans around him. Raditz, Broly, and a very tired Gine express a strong desire to revive Kakarot ASAP. While Vegeta warns that with Frieza being killed, King Cold couldn't be too far behind, and by all accounts, he was much more powerful than his son. So if anything, they would all need as much help as they could get anyway. Bardock agrees with this idea, and thinking that if they worded a wish correctly, they could revive Kakarot as well as the other Saiyans. He then asks Nail to make 2 wishes for them. Revive every Saiyan that was killed by Frieza and his men, and bring all Saiyans to planet Vegeta. The next few moments, bright flashes of light appeared all over the planet as Saiyans began to reappear, all cheering and roaring in delight at being released from hell. Kakarot gasps back to life and feels his chest, finding no wounds there, and himself back alive, and signs of relief, before being brung into a crushing hug by his mother and Broly. Chaos soon began to ensue as the Saiyans grow rowdy and clamor with questions about what had happened, before one power in the crowd flared to life and pushed everyone away, walking forward with an angry snarl. King Vegeta. Vegeta Jr., seeing his father, merely scoffed and rolled his eyes. But when King Vegeta saw him, he moved to praise him, claiming him as their savior and all other manners of praise. It didn't take long for the prince to get fed up with this, but he soon noticed his brother alive and next to Bardock, and flew towards him, embracing him with pride at his brother's bravery and cunning in battle. When King Vegeta realized who it was, he began to roar about his disgrace of a son being back on the planet, and this time, Vegeta Jr. reared on him, snarling in anger and going into a whole tirade about Turbo being 10 times the Saiyan that their father ever was, and being instrumental in the defeat of Frieza. The Saiyans stand around shocked, as Vegeta had defended what was in their minds a weaker Saiyan, which was extremely un-Saiyan-like, and began to clamor and jeer the prince, who was strongly considering sending them all back to hell at the moment. The chaos continued until a bright yellow flash went off, and they all turned to see Kakarot in his Super Saiyan state. He looked serious, as if this was intentional, but he hadn't actually meant to do it. He was just trying to see if he could go back into the form and accidentally fell into it. Vegeta scoffs and chuckles at this, and tries to do the same, and with a bit of struggle is able to do so. Just after them, Broly is also able to join them in the form, now with full control of himself. The three look at each other eagerly, knowing that their training from now on would be very fun with this new power. The Saiyans are quiet and awestruck, seeing 3 legendary Super Saiyans in front of them. But soon after, all of them that can sense energy are able to feel a power that they had been dreading. King Cold was near. Kakarot then roared out in a commanding voice to the others. Right now, Bardock was in charge of the Saiyans. Bardock's sweat drops at all this pressure and begins to give out orders. When Vegeta Sr. tries to interject, Jr. quickly shuts him up by telling him his opinion meant nothing at the moment, and tearing his necklace away and throwing it into the ground. Bardock then begins to give the Saiyans a quick crash course in how he and the others had learned to control the Grade 8 form, as their time grew shorter and shorter. On his ship, King Cold was fretting about his baby boy. Captain Ginyu was at his side actually, having been called in for this, and was just as worried as he was. Before they could really clock what was going on, the ship's sensors began to go crazy and explode, as a bright light was seen outside. The combined might of every Saiyan blasted through the ship. This time, the plan had actually worked. After this, Bardock and the others take their time and inform the other Saiyans of what it really went down. And a few hours later, the Saiyans are seen celebrating in a huge planet-wide feast. Though soon after, the question on everyone's mind is asked, what do we do now? The eyes of everyone present look to King Vegeta, but before he can even speak, Vegeta Jr. stands and says that as the strongest, their only possible leader could be Kakarot. This ends up making Kakarot choke on the food he was currently eating, as everyone looks to him. He gives Vegeta a weird look, completely off guard that he would surrender the throne this easily. Vegeta then proudly proclaims that one day he would defeat Kakarot and earn the throne like a true Saiyan warrior. Kakarot just sweat drops this, and then looks to his family and smiles nervously, but then gets an idea and protests that Bardock should be the leader. He had truly orchestrated all of this. Even though he wasn't the strongest, his leadership had been instrumental in literally everything that had happened so far. Bardock growls, a bit disappointed that Kakarot wouldn't take the leadership, but realizing that the man had much more to mature before he could be considered set to lead. He then stands proudly accepting his coronation, but he announces there were going to be some big changes. This position was no longer going to be that of royalty. If anything, Bardock was just the boss, because they would be doing away with the class system, and they were no longer in the planet trade business. They would now be a group that worked for the protection of weaker people in the universe. They would continue to completely eradicate the forces of Frieza as well. And as for the Saiyans that would like to fight against this new change, they were more than welcome to go about their business about the universe. But if they caused trouble and made anyone look down on Saiyans for being brutes, then they would be treated as Frieza loyalists and destroyed. Finally, and most importantly, the future of the Saiyan race lied in the hands of everyone, not just him. So if anyone had problems with the way he ran things, then they were welcome to take him on, anytime, anywhere. He would take on all challengers. But that, plus Ultra Fam, will be leaving this timeline off for now. And I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this third installment of What If Goku Landed on Planet Namek. Huge thanks to everybody who contributed into this part. I really appreciate all of them. They added so much more to this part than what I could have done by myself. From Super Savage 789 and those amazing animations that you can just tell that he put so much time and effort into. And by the way, he does What Ifs of his own, so if you really want some more What If content, go check him out. He does them pretty well. There's also AmaiNeiko, Anna, or the voice of Gine, who was here in this part. She did way better than the little voice acting I did in the middle of it. That was really bad, but I really appreciate her. She did put so much time and effort into that. She gave me like a few other attempts for it, and we kind of just chose the best one. I really appreciate her putting some real emotion into that scene. Also a big thanks to Jdella, who's the person behind that Broly and Gine art that you see kind of throughout the video because I loved it so much. He has a lot of skill. I really love that picture. Definitely very glad that he hit me up about that. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, bro. Also, big shout out to Rick, Hvshrt, I think that's how you say it, at DeviantArt. He actually let me use a Gine render of his in the video, so really big shout out to him as well. You can find all these creators down in the description below. Again, I can't stress how much I'm so just appreciative of everybody putting so much effort into this and, you know, making this be something that was actually worth people watching. But yeah guys, as always, go beyond, plus Ultra. See you next time. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. And thanks for watching.